Welcome to Becket's Stream of Conscience podcast. Imagine your elementary school introduces a new curriculum on gender and sexuality to talk to your young children about issues such as gender transitioning, pride parades, and playground romances. Worse, the school refuses to tell you when it's going to introduce these topics and warns you that you don't have the right to opt out in any case. Well, that's exactly what led to a recent lawsuit in Montgomery County, Maryland, Mahmoud versus Taylor. And we're joined today by two of the families that brought the lawsuit, Chris and Melissa Persak, Jeff and Svitlana Roman, to hear firsthand their experiences. I'm Eric Baxter, an attorney at the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty, where we had the privilege of taking their case all the way to the United States Supreme Court. But before we get that far, let's start at the beginning. I know both of you worked hard to get your kids in Montgomery County Public Schools and were very involved there. Maybe Chris and Melissa, would you start by telling us kind of what your experience was with the schools before this lawsuit and why you were so anxious to have your children in the Montgomery County Public Schools?
So I grew up going to Montgomery County Public Schools, and I love the diversity of it. I've been here all my life. I guess I'm never going anywhere now. But we love the fact that our kids have, and our neighbors, everybody is, an eclectic group of different diversities and religions. We just went to, one of our daughter's best friend's bat mitzvahs last weekend. I grew up going to them. It's been a great experience up until that point. So, yeah.
And how about you, Jeff and Svitlana?
I also went to Montgomery County public schools growing up, and we purchased our home not too long, about 7 years ago, specifically where we did for the schools in the Churchill cluster, and we would have had the ability for a kid to walk from elementary school all the way through high school where we specifically bought, and we made that very conscious choice. But the county had other intentions.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a couple of my kids go through Montgomery County Public Schools. They have a long tradition and history of being excellent schools. As you said, very diverse. I think we saw that for the last couple of years, Montgomery County was listed as the most religiously diverse county in the nation. So there are just a lot of Muslims, Ethiopian Orthodox, Jewish residents, so just a wonderful diversity of citizens of Montgomery County. How did you first learn about this lawsuit? I know, Melissa, you were very involved. I think you had volunteered a lot in the schools. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Doing what kind of stuff?
So actually, funny enough, the book fair. I was the book fair chair for many years, and got to work inside the school and set up all the books for 1 week every year. I was on the PTA, and Chris, coaching a ton. We're in the schools, volunteering in the classrooms, pulling kids out, doing arts and crafts and different activities, and coaching and all of that good stuff. So.
And did you ever have experience? I mean, I've never asked you this before, but when you were doing the book fairs, did you have any experience with, did they give you any guidance about selecting books or?
So we didn't get to choose which books came to the book fair and the children could buy. But funny enough, from the proceeds of the book fair, I would help the librarian choose books for their library. And I did kind of cross-reference some of those that were on her list before I put in the order. So I did, get to look at that. Everything, was good. But I did kind of oversee a little bit of that.
Yeah. And maybe tell us, how did you first learn about this? I think one of your daughters brought home a book, and that raised some questions in your mind. Maybe Chris, you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so that was November of 2022. That's the catalyst to where we're talking with you about this right now. My youngest was 9 years old at the time, got a book from the Short Elementary School library called My Maddie, which was about a mom-dad combo, so it doesn't identify as either one. And my oldest is the one that said, "Hey, Dad, I think Emmy got this because her name is Maddie." She had no idea what was inside it. I read the book. I sent a picture to Melissa. We met with the principal the next day because, from our perspective, it just seemed like some pretty heavy topics to get into gender and sexuality for, in a library where kids could be as young as 4, Eric, to get those books out.
Yeah, and how old were your children?
So she was 9 at the time when she brought home that book. Young. And I was not ready to tell her that I could be a man. It wasn't, we weren't there yet, and it came out of nowhere, and it showed up on our kitchen counter, no warning. And so that's why we took action, and we went in the next day to our principal, and she then told us it's going to be coming out in a curriculum. There's going to be a whole curriculum about it. And these books are going to be showing up also in the classrooms and, teacher-led instruction. So that's when it all opened up, a can of worms.
And tell us about the principal's response. Was she responsive to your concerns, or she felt trapped, or kind of they knew you. I assume that she knew you pretty well.
Yes, we had a great relationship. And she said she wasn't aware of this particular book that was in her own library, but she did say she does feel like every family should be represented. So
they started the lines of the mirrors and windows. I feel like that was the first time we heard it. And we had gone in with the book, and the principal had asked us, well, what brings you here? Our oldest was the president of the elementary school. So that, again, both of our kids were engaged. And she said, Chris, this is coming from on high. The Board of Education has made this decision, and it's going to be part of the English and Language Arts curriculum. And we kindly told her at the time that we're going to tell every single parent we know, which we happen to know a lot because of how engaged we are. And she was inundated and flooded with phone calls over the next week or two. Her immediate response was to just get a grasp, because she was unaware, as she shared with us, that they were even in her library yet, but she was aware it was coming. So she, I think, put a pause for 2 or 3 weeks.
So a lot of your friends expressed concern as you talked
Yes.
to them. A lot of people reached out.
they did. Then they started contacting the school. And then they were going to allow us to opt out of, they decided there was going to be one day that the entire school, each teacher had to read one of these LGBTQ books. And even the PTA president and the vice president I showed up in rainbow, and it was a whole day of this, new
Instruction
curriculum.
on LGBTQ
Yes.
issues, yeah.
Yeah.
And Jeff and Svitlana, how did you learn about this? I don't think I've heard your story about how this first came to your attention.
So there is a newsletter that is being sent out by Montgomery County, and I believe with the previous superintendent, the intention was to notify parents weekly about any kind of updates. And so that would come out around Wednesday, middle of the week, I believe. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of other newsletters that are coming out from MCPS, and among them is this weekly email, which just noted the fact as an announcement somewhere. I don't want to say it was buried, but it wasn't very front and center, saying that these books are coming to MCPS, starting with K through 12. And it had referenced in a hyperlink the actual books that will be included in the instruction. It also, the wording of how it was written, how the announcement was written, made you believe like it was optional by the for the teacher to choose whether they would actually introduce that in the classrooms or not. So, of course, my first reaction was, well, I'm going to reach out to my teacher, right, and see if that was in her plans to introduce that material in her classroom. And when I did, she actually notified me that it was not optional, to which I had to push back because of the language of the announcement, which clearly stated it was optional, at least the way that it read to me. So I've asked for a conversation with the principal. She basically just put me in contact with the principal, letting me know that, the principal will take it from there. I was trying to get more people, like you were mentioning, involved in a conversation about whether this is appropriate or not. So I made during a PTA meeting, I sort of made a suggestion for us to discuss that, which was met with more of a, we can't discuss it in this setting because this is something we will be discussing one-on-one with every parent. So
you just raised this like in the open comment session of the meeting kind of thing?
And it was an online format, right? So people were on the phones and via Zoom. So it was one of those Zoom meetings. So it was very easy to sort of stop the comment right there. And it was basically just mentioned the fact that if anybody has any concerns about what's coming up on the curriculum, they would need to reach out to their principal and have a one-on-one conversation, which I think it's a very good way of, from the Montgomery County public schools, a very good way to sort of separate individual parents. And then they sit you down in a room. This is how my experience went. I was in the room with two representatives, the principal and the assistant
And was Jeff
principal.
with you, or did you?
No, I was traveling for work at the time I called in, but it's important to note, Lana was told she was just going to be meeting with the principal just to have a conversation. And of course there's, the silent bureaucrat from central office, the commissar sitting there to keep an eye on the principal and make sure that no lines, that the appropriate line was held. And it's very isolating to the parent. You don't realize how many people out there may be on your side.
So in that conversation, it was very clear that we wouldn't necessarily agree on, the conversation about whether these materials need to be in a public school in the first place was sort of off the table. So, and I just ended it with saying, I understand we can't necessarily come to a conclusion. Maybe, you consider those materials important. I think for elementary age children, those materials are not necessary to introduce at such an early age. We don't have to agree on that. All I would like to ask is, one, to make it very clear that the teachers have an optionality to teach it or not, and then two, give the choice to parents to opt in. I feel like a lot of parents do not read these weekly announcements.
Right.
Yep.
A lot of people don't pay attention to these emails coming out of MCPS because of sheer volume of them. It's hard to keep track. So I thought the best thing to do would be to allow people to opt in into these materials for those that are interested. We went into the email format of further discussion, and the email that all I was asking in the email is to give me an answer on whether there is a choice for teachers as it was worded in the announcement, and they would kind of respond in an odd way, not giving me a yes or no. But I continued to push and push and push, and finally I got from the board, I believe that email was forwarded all the way up to the Board of Education, and I finally got, yes, it's optional as a response. And that was sort of a win. I believe it's one of the items that's submitted in the lawsuit.
Yeah, I remember seeing some of those emails, and I was kind of struck how they gave these very vague answers. It felt like they were uncomfortable telling you that you could opt out. And so there was just, one email would kind of suggest that you could opt out, and then you would press for clarification, and the next email would be like send you the other direction, and it was very hard. And then eventually someone told you, yes, you could opt out. But that must have been a little bit frustrating in the process.
Very frustrating. And, I used to do audits as my profession, and so I recognize this ambiguous language very well, because that's kind of how you give an audit opinion, right? Where you're not necessarily sticking to the point, and yes or no question is not something you're trying to answer. So that's why it was so important for me to actually get a straight up yes or no, because all the other responses were just not, you could read them both ways, and I wasn't going to take that as an answer.
Right. And, it was somewhat unfortunate in my view, because up to this time, Montgomery County actually had a very generous opt-out policy. I had a couple of kids go through the Montgomery County public schools, and at various times, one of my sons, someone brought, he brought home a book, and he just told us, I'm really not comfortable reading this. And we said, well, why don't you go ask your teacher if you can get another book? And he took it in, and the teacher kind of read through it, and she's like, oh, you're right. I didn't know this stuff was even in it. She had just pulled it off of an approved list, and she was uncomfortable teaching it, and so she changed it for the entire class. Another one of my sons, wanted to opt out of the sex ed class, again, just on his own initiative, and that was no problem. In fact, Maryland law requires opt-outs from sex ed. And so some of this felt very odd that you're asking for these opt-outs. Montgomery County tries very hard to kind of respect the diversity of its residents, and so it was a little bit shocking to have this kind of sudden wall that you were hitting, I imagine, where there was this confusion about, not really telling you can't opt out, but definitely giving you a feeling that wouldn't be allowed. I mean, was that kind of your experience, or?
Yes, I
And
think
just,
that.
yeah, you go.
You could sense, looking back now, it's easier to see it, but the education machine within Montgomery County was all in alignment. So you had the teachers union came out pretty quickly in support of the curriculum. You had the MCCPTA came out. That's how it got to our PTA, where you could sense like there was a coordinated effort behind the scenes. Like they were expecting something, even though they tried to hide it. So as these things were organically happening across the county, but we didn't know that, you know, the Romans were talking, that our other friends who will keep off here because they've had to deal with similar things that we all have, that, okay, this is a coordinated effort under the guise of transparency, Eric. And I make the joke like that. I think some of the leaders in the county need to better understand what that actually means, transparency. So it was almost like a way to hide this from parents, disassociate us from our kids, and start to create conflict with the principals and the administrators and the teachers, to which, to that point, I think we would argue we had a very good relationship and good experience up until, you know, all this started to occur.
I mean, that's a theme that I've heard over and over, that a lot of parents is, you know, they're mostly offended by this kind of the breach of trust, this sense of like we had an open conversation before, and all of a sudden they no longer could know for certain if the school was giving them a straightforward answer. And I think that's been a hard thing for a lot of parents to overcome. Even after we won the lawsuit, I feel like a lot of parents are still questioning whether they can trust what's coming out of Montgomery County schools.
What begs the question too is, what is the purpose of the school board? What agenda are they serving? Who do they actually serve when they're going against the parents of their students? So I almost feel like they were shocked that there were parents who were rejecting these books. In Montgomery County, we live in a miasma where people don't really push back against, you know,
Public school, right? The school board.
They're too busy too.
The machine politics don't get pushed back, and I think they were a little bit shocked that they were prepared, to your point, to head anything off at the pass, but the numbers, I think, surprised them.
Yeah.
And an MCPS teacher did tell me that they had an entire script that they were to tell parents if we wanted to opt out. They had a script come down from the board or superintendent that they had to tell.
What does that tell you about how they view the parents?
Exactly.
It becomes an enemy tug of war distinction relationship.
And I would argue, I'll give you an experience too, when fast forward to January of 2023, after we had met with our principal, she actually, and I'll give her a lot of credit for this, had a community meeting for our school. There was probably 50 or 60 families or people there. And I think the reason they wanted to meet with you one-on-one is because when they set up this meeting, it was under the guise that they wanted feedback from us, Eric. The reality was you could figure out pretty quickly with some of the MCPS administrators that were in attendance that, no, this is coming out and you're going to deal with this. Well, the most articulate people and the most passionate pushing back saying, wait, these kids are 4 to 11. Why are we talking about gender and sexuality? They should be worried about math, English, reading, etc. And in that environment, about 80% of the folks, and again, I would still say probably most first and second generation Americans, stood up and said, whoa, what are we doing? We came here for religious freedom. Now you're starting to inject topics and things that, number one, could be against their sincerely held religious beliefs, but number two, they're 4 and 6 and 10 years old. And then, you know, it just kept going from there, and you just realize, wow. And then I would say that you could see, like, the folks in the county, like, again, this is where we all start meeting organically together to push back, and they were prepared. The machine was ready. I mean, they started with the slandering almost immediately. Oh, we're book banners, we're bigots, we're white supremacists. I mean, all that's on the record from leaders within the county.
I think to regain the trust of the community, it's also very difficult now because of the timing of the events, because at that time, the superintendent, Monica McKnight, actually came out and held a meeting with all the parents before all of this started, where she has established 3 main goals for MCPS. And one of the first ones was regain trust in the community and bring back, parents in involvement. And so hearing this pushback after you have gone and you have recognized there's an issue with trust, and yet again you're following in the same exact footsteps and proving that your words and your intentions mean very little, I think we are finding ourselves today, 3 years later, having a very difficult time trusting anything that comes out in a verbal or written announcement, because the intentions behind it are just so different in reality.
Yeah, and to be fair, Chris, you mentioned, a teacher that you thought was really respectful in the way she tried to handle this. And there were some teachers who wanted to opt themselves out, right? They were not comfortable teaching. We talked to some teachers who really were supportive of the lawsuit, but were afraid to speak out, afraid that they might lose their jobs. There was also, you might remember, in the litigation, there came out a letter that the principals union had written to the school board saying that they thought these books were age inappropriate. One of the books, Love, Violet, is about two girls who fall in love on the playground and exchange valentines and romantic feelings. And the principals wrote and said, we don't think teachers should be talking to kids at this age about any kind of romance, regardless of sexual orientation, right? And they just felt like the books were dismissive. They were non-factual. Some of the books, talking about gender transitioning, doctors guessed at your sex when you were born. So I credit the principals union for recognizing that these very controversial issues, these are not, hard set facts, highly disputed by a lot of people. But there was something about the situation that despite that pushback, again, I guess the people who ultimately were in charge eventually were able to clamp that down and really just kind of push this forward. So going back, the books were introduced in November 2022, early 2023, and late 2022, early 2023, you were working on getting opt-outs and had some success. You were told you could opt out. And then as I recall, basically you were told you can opt out this year, but not next year. Mm-hmm. There was this weird situation where on March 22nd, I think it was, the school board issued a public statement saying, yes, you can opt out. These opt-outs are required by Maryland law. And then the very next day, without any explanation, a new press release that came out and said, no, actually, we won't notify you when these books are read, and we will not allow any opt-outs. And I think that's when the issue really picked up steam. There were a lot of people in the community who started showing up at school board meetings, testifying. There were protests. I wonder if you could describe kind of what that was like. What was the feeling? Who were the people? How big were they? What was your experience of these?
Those protests, they were just so many people. We were there for our children. And it was so many mama bears, papa bears. We just wanted to keep our children innocent. That's all we were there for. All of us came together for our children. We weren't pushing an agenda. It wasn't political. It was just, we weren't ready, and we should have that right. So the protests were, of course, the other side was there. It was hard to see. I've never experienced anything like that. I don't like, confrontation. I like to please people, but I was this passionate that I just knew this was not right. We needed to just, keep this out of the schools. And that's why we were all there. And we just met great people. We met so many great people, throughout the process. So it still kills me though. We can get opt-outs for Halloween. We got an opt-out notice for visual and hearing screening at our middle school. And now so many people opted out of Halloween that now we have fall parties. There's no Halloween anymore. It's just our Valentine parties are now friendship parties. So you can't have a Valentine, but you can talk about, having liking the same sex and having a playground relationship, but you're not, supposed to be giving Valentines out. You have friends, and that's what you are. And so it's just crazy what side they take, and it's just been very frustrating. Yeah. It's been so frustrating.
And who were the parents? I mean, were these? I know they were people of all different faiths. Can you kind of describe who were the people that were there? And
yeah, I mean, all of us obviously had kids in public school. A lot since then have put them in private, but a lot of the Muslim community came out hard. Ethiopian community, it was hard to besides word of mouth, a lot of us aren't going to go blast this out to everybody because it's just so controversial. So we did find that it was hard to get the word out to all these people, and the protests were during the day too, and because the Board of Education meetings are during the day. So we had someone to talk to the board about, if you want parent involvement, you need to make these meetings in the evenings. The parents who cannot come to these meetings and try to make a difference. So it's just everything they do is against us. But by
design.
Yeah.
Well, I think the odds to have 800 or 1,000 people, and I'll call it the parents.
I know, like you go to school board meetings, normally there's no one there.
Right.
To have 1,000 people show up was really incredible.
And
Where
that was
SWAT team was there. SWAT,
I mean, to have that organically happen, though, and we look back again, like some of the positives that have come out of this, across a wide swath across Montgomery County, all the religions A to Z, very passionate people with the same belief. I mean, I think we even joked from the beginning, wow, this is one way we've brought all the religions together, and it was because we're all parents, and that's the fundamental thing. I think all of us as parents, we want the best for our kids. But, from the beginning, for that to happen, because anything that was ever posted online, Eric, by some of the folks, immediately attacked, immediately doxxed. I mean, it was, and then you'd hear the comments from various members, again, leaders in the county, calling us bigots and white supremacists. I mean, that's on the record.
That was one of the surprising things. I mean, especially because it was predominantly actually Muslim and Ethiopian Orthodox members of the community who showed up. And for them, I know, to be in a room and then one of the board members to say, you're aligning with white supremacists, you're xenophobes, that was really shocking to hear from their own school board representatives. And then there was a county board member who echoed those sentiments. And again, I think that really deepened the kind of the distrust that was developing through this process, a feeling of like, wait, these are people that are supposed to be representing our interests as parents, and there was
supposed to be public servants.
And a lot of kind of negative pushback.
I will also say that it is very sad that during that time the political situation was such that a lot of the Christian families and parents did not come out and did not express their concerns publicly. And I think a big part of that is exactly what you're getting to, because nobody has even could imagine that the Muslim community was more of like protected from those type of comments, from those type of attacks, right? Because it just sounds really ridiculous. Like, how can you say that they are, white nationalists and whatnot, right? So the Muslim community came out in protest, almost feeling more safe than anybody else at that moment to be able to speak out. And I have neighbors in my community where I would have a conversation and they would share with me that with me, they would be open and letting me know that, no, that's not the materials that they support, and they would love an opportunity to opt out and things like that. In the community of parents and other moms, the moment you have more than 5 people in the room, everybody is in support. The moment you get somebody away and they're able to actually speak kind of freely one-on-one, they're like, no, this is so inappropriate. So why did you say just a minute ago in front of everybody that, this is just inclusion, and et cetera? And it's just because the environment was such that everybody was just going with the
they're afraid to speak
narrative.
out. There might be repercussions.
It was just, the labeling was so intense that people just did not want to speak out freely. And I think till
that
now,
was at the national level too.
National level, and
the way
still
the government was branding, parents who were pushing back, it was very much silencing many people.
And it was a huge benefit. I mean, the Muslim community really did step up in a big way. I mean, they are the ones who kind of made document requests to the county and got a lot of the documents that ended up helping our lawsuit quite a bit. They went and talked to the county executive, who, as has been reported to me, was sympathetic and kind of behind the scenes pressured the school to kind of do the right thing, but then nothing really came of that. And so, but it was huge to have such a diverse community come out, and I think it really startled kind of the political machine, as you've said, in Montgomery County, because they weren't used to having some of their own voters kind of protesting these issues. And so that really did make a difference, but still to no avail. In the end, the school board really stuck to this idea that after the 2022-2023 school year, no more opt-outs would be allowed. I learned about this. I was just having a lazy Saturday morning. I woke up late, and my wife was already reading the news, and she's like, oh my gosh, you've got to read about this. The school is introducing all these books, and they're not allowing parents to opt out. She's like, you should sue them. And so, so we started kind of, based on the names that were listed in the article, kind of calling around to find people who would be interested in joining the lawsuit. We eventually connected with you, but what was that like, the idea of joining a lawsuit? What went through your mind? what were the considerations that you had to weigh before you agreed to be part
I
of the
hate
lawsuit?
to say it, but safety. I mean, the names will be out there. It would be in the public sphere. So there was some screenshots that Chris saved. I'm glad you did a few years ago, where there were groups in Montgomery County actively directing adults to shun children and have their children shun children. At the time, ours was 8 years old. I mean, this is not how normal, rational adults should be behaving.
Or I think they kind of published your names and said
They also did publish our names.
Mm-hmm.
They published our names. They said what high school I went to. Those are enough. Those 2 data points you can track out. Track down where we live and who we are. So when we were talking about the invitation to be in this lawsuit, be a part of it, we really had to think about, well, look at where we live, look at who our neighbors are. Do we want to have that scrutiny? I think you guys probably took a little bit more heat, though, than we did.
Yeah. It was, I think, Eric, I've shared this story before. When he first reached out, we said we'll share any and all information we had. So we had emails. We had saved a lot of information. Yeah. We tried to stay organized on things that we've had, and felt like this was a big deal. And then when you called us, I think the second time we met, you see cancel culture was prevalent in 2023, and Melissa and I make a personal decision on behalf of our families that weighed very heavily. To Jeff's point, do we want our name out in the universe? And what does that feel like? And then, but we did look at each other, and I think you can attest to this. We said, well, we keep saying someone's got to do something. It's us. This is our chance to do it. And we just felt like, from going back to November, from our youngest to pick out a book that started this whole thing, it was God saying, yeah, this is what you need to do. And we made that decision. Now, for a good 10 days, I'm telling you, after we got doxxed by members of the county council, by groups affiliated with MCPS, I had to file a police report so I could have additional protection for the family. I mean, that was real. That was tangible. That was 10 days of
Well, I remember you had come to us, and we've dealt with these issues a little bit, but I was personally a little uncertain of what protections are out there. And we did call the police, and they were very good. I think they came out and visited with you and said that they would, kind of gave you some advice so that they could patrol the neighborhood more. So that was helpful, but you still had some things on your LinkedIn account profile, as I recall. Is that right?
Yeah.
Kind of targeting your business.
So I had someone that was affiliated with the Army, in theory, on LinkedIn. So I went to the Inspector General of the Army and filed a report. But at the time, they weren't really that sympathetic to actually tracking that person down. Yeah. Now, again, I still have all those receipts, and that's probably something that we have to deal with later. But it was a wild time.
You said that there were actually members of the council that were part of the doxing, part of the board?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, again, these are public servants. He's a member of the public. That's not service. That's aggression. And what consequences will they face?
We'll find out.
Well, it's unfortunate because the odds are against you on getting any consequences.
Well, the paradox, Eric, I think goes back, this is way off script, I get it, but you think about the comments our leaders talk about in Montgomery County. They talk about the beauty of the religious diversity. Yeah. That's why we live here. That's we enjoy. I mean, yet the next thing out of their mouth will be something, calling us white supremacists or bigots or trying to shut us down for sincerely held religious beliefs. It's what world do we live in? What are we actually, what do we really believe? And that's to then attack the religious community after you're trying to embrace them for votes. But then the next thing out is you're pretty much going after the number one thing that's of importance to us, which is our kids.
Yeah, and and it wasn't just a group of minority parents. The Washington Post and University of Maryland did a joint poll when this curriculum first came out, so it was the fall of 2022. And in that poll, 70% of Maryland residents felt that these books were inappropriate for elementary school. Mm-hmm. And then by middle school, it was 60%, and then high school is closer to 50% or high 40%. Even in high school, thought that some of these materials would be inappropriate or some of these topics would be inappropriate. So that was, I guess, part of what made it so surprising that this wasn't a minority view. Mm-hmm. I mean, not that would justify treating, a minority viewpoint with such disrespect. But this was they were really pushing it back against the majority of the community who thought that these things were disrespectful, or inappropriate, I guess, for in particular for that age group. So yeah, we ended up filing the lawsuit in August. I think it was August of 2023. You had those unfortunate experiences with the community. Some people giving pushback and the doxing and so forth. We got a pretty early hearing from the judge. I can't remember, were you both able to go to that early hearing? Any impressions? You weren't able to go there. So the judge in Montgomery County, one of the interesting things about this issue, there was a case back in the early 1970s called Wisconsin versus Yoder, where the Amish community were pushing back against mandatory education through 10th grade. In Wisconsin at the time, you had to go until you finished 10th grade. And in the Amish community, it was traditional after 8th grade to bring your children home and kind of give them a vocational education on the farm, helping them learn the skills that would help them thrive in the religious community. And Wisconsin was literally like jailing parents and telling them that, they had to leave their kids in for 2 more years. And that case also went to the Supreme Court. And back in 1972, the Supreme Court said, look, this has been part of the Amish tradition for centuries. Their children as a whole grow up to be productive citizens within their communities. The state doesn't have, the state, yes, has an interest in making sure that kids receive a basic math, reasoning, writing, reading kind of education, but not to specify like you have to do this exact number of years or these subjects. And so they gave the Amish a complete opt-out from 9th and 10th grade. And so we were coming into the court asking for just an opt-out from one class, let our kids go sit in the library. And the odd thing is that from that case in 1972, almost every court to have addressed these types of issues denied parental opt-outs. So there was just something where judges feel this compulsion to kind of like support the public education system as opposed to parents' needs. So we really were facing an uphill battle going in to the district court, where the judge, as we almost expected, said, look, once you can choose to keep your kids at home, homeschool. You can choose to put them in private school. But once you choose public school, you have no right to complain about what they're taught in the public schools, which, if you think about it, is just absolutely absurd. You think about kind of the extreme types of material that parents or that schools could teach children. There had to be some kind of right in there. So we lost in the district court, but unfortunately it wasn't super surprising because most of the cases over the last 50 years had really gone against us.
You could almost sum that up as, hey, those kids crossed that threshold, they belong to us.
Yeah.
Which is offensive. It was disgusting. I mean, a parent has a special obligation to a child for the rest of that child's life into their adulthood. And the school is, every teacher is going to be there a discrete semester or maybe 1 year in that child's upbringing. But the parent is with that child through their entire life. Parents are responsible for the faith formation, the moral guidance, the ultimate upbringing of their children, not government schools.
Yeah. And for you, I mean, for some parents, that's just common sense, right? Your understanding was especially informed by your religious faith. Mm-hmm. Were there specific things about your faith that kind of gave you the courage or the motivation to move forward in this setting?
I mean, Christ says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. When you tell lies about reality, that a man can become a woman, that a woman can become a man, when you're putting these in front of children, it's a direct contradiction to the truth and the beauty that Christ brings.
I'd say one of the things that motivated Melissa and me, beyond being Catholics and raising our girls in the Catholic faith, that meeting in January of 2023, watching these first, second, third generation Americans, Eric, who were speaking up at that time, but you could sense like this, like almost like a sense of hopelessness. Like their words didn't matter. This was coming down and they could do nothing about it. And follow-up conversations we had, I mean, that's the feelings they had, like, we can't do anything. So again, when you made that call, that certainly played into our decision to do this as like, we got to help other people who feel like they don't have a voice.
Yeah, I had several parents come to me who said that they had left their, countries of birth because of religious extremism, and they wanted to kind of be able to control their own religious upbringing of their children. And now they felt like the public schools here in the United States were kind of doing the, taking it to another extreme, pushing them another way. And they were really, when one said, like, I almost feel like I should have stayed and I'd be better off where I was. And so it was really surprising and hurtful to think that you have these, wonderful families coming to the county who bring so much diversity and strength to our community. And, they're feeling like their religious liberty, which should be our first liberty, is being squelched. And so it was a little bit, and a lot of them came, there was a packed courthouse, the oral argument in the district court. A lot of them came, and we had if you remember, we actually had enough people out there that we kind of gave some remarks afterwards. it was very discouraging for a lot of people to hear a judge say, once you put your kids in the public schools, your rights end. And literally, there was another judge who just said parents' rights end at the threshold of the schoolhouse doors.
Literally?
Was just quite shocking. That was out in the Ninth Circuit in California. So just some really kind of restrictive views, when in reality, one of the other things that we brought out in the lawsuit is every state in the country requires opt-outs for sex education. Parents have to either opt in or they have the right to opt out. And that's always been true. And so this idea that schools can't do this or it's too difficult, it's not administrable, that was one of the arguments that this school made. It was like, we just can't administer this. And we pointed out, like, look, you're under state law, you're already administering it when you teach it during sex ed. You deliberately took it out of sex ed to put it into English and language arts to avoid that opt-out. And so there's really no reason to say that you can't do this.
Wouldn't there be a corollary, and you're, of course, the lawyer, wouldn't there be a corollary that the school's rights over your children end at your threshold? So when they're sending these books and these assignments, they're bringing in and forcing conversations upon you and your child as they have to do a book report on pride puppies or whatever it might be. Isn't that, how can it go only one direction?
Yeah, there definitely needs to be a broader conversation. That's one of the reasons why at the Becket Fund we were interested in bringing this lawsuit, is to kind of shift the conversation. That parents' rights shouldn't end. Mm-hmm. They should follow their child, not follow kind of like the limits that the county or the school board places on them. And so that's one of the reasons why we brought the lawsuit and kept pushing it forward. Of course, the next stop was the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. We were a little more optimistic there. We had a pretty friendly panel. 3 judges, as you know, rule at the appellate level, and so we thought we could get a favorable ruling. But again, 2 of the panelists ruled against us. We did have a dissenting judge who really gave us a strong dissenting opinion, which is an important hook when you're trying to get to the Supreme Court to show that courts or judges are divided on these issues. But again, 2 of the judges basically took this long line of precedent, ignoring the Wisconsin versus Yoder Amish case, and just saying, until your kids are actually forced to disavow their beliefs or to do something that would violate their religious beliefs, there's no burden on your religion. And so again, just this feeling of like, wow, we have to wait for our kid to actually, accept the philosophy of these books before we have any action. It just seemed absurd on its face. But it was a little discouraging knowing that we had such a long line of cases that were kind of going against us on that front. So, but that was an important step, losing at the Fourth Circuit. If you win at the Fourth Circuit, you get a ruling that protects people in the 7 or 8 states that are within the Fourth Circuit. Maybe not even that many, 5 or 6 probably. But if you go to the Supreme Court, you have a chance at a ruling that will protect the whole country. And I know that was part of your motivation. We talked a lot about you wanted to make sure that it wasn't just you, that other parents everywhere could have these same rights. So, when we got to the Supreme Court, you probably know, but like 8,000 petitions are filed every year, and the court maybe takes 50 or 60 of them. So when you're filing, it's like you just don't know. The odds are really against you. We eventually did get a grant. I'm just curious what your feelings were at that time. What were you?
Well, it was a little unreal. We sort of did not want to put our hopes up too much because we've discussed with you kind of the chances, right? You were very honest about the chances of our case, just any case making it through to the Supreme Court were not very high. So we kept our hopes down, but we kept praying, and we knew that this is an important issue. So, we felt like our prayers were answered because, honestly, I couldn't see a world where our case would not make it to the Supreme Court, just because it's so important for ultimate religious freedom protections and for children. And I think we all recognize children are our future, and it's very important to put the education of our children, the morals, the moral values of our children are so important to the future of our country, the future of our society. And I just believed that it would get the proper attention it deserved.
Yeah, I love that optimism. And even, it's funny because even people who generally politically, I don't align with, when I would tell them about this, that concept of like parents having the choice. And some of them would even say, like, maybe I'll be in another state someday where there's other books that I don't like that I wouldn't want my kids out. So this is really something that protected everybody. That issue of like parents having control over their children really resonated with a lot of parents.
I think for us, it was the historical significance. I mean, that was really crazy. I mean, being in that room. But I think, I've called April 22nd Vindication Day for us because for 2 years it was under this inclusion and all the smears and attacks against us, Eric. And then we were able to watch it real time as the case from the school system was being laid bare across the entire country. And the comments that some of the judges made about, wait a minute, you have direct data that you all had shared with them. These aren't just books about playground romance. You're telling 6-year-olds that doctors are guessing at their sex at birth. I mean, that was a quote from one of the Supreme Court justices. 9-year-olds could change their pronouns like the weather. And what could the other side's like, yeah, that's a document. Like, that's exactly what we've been trying to say for 2 years. This was not just a love story. This wasn't about marriage. This was about gender and sexuality for kids 4 to 11 years old. And I really do feel like that's when we walked out saying, thank you.
Yeah, it was really cool that the justices had read the books so carefully. I mean, as you said, one of the books was called What Are Your Words? And it's literally a book about this child who spends the whole day trying to figure out what his or her, it was unclear what sex the child was, what pronouns the child would use. And they try a lot of different things, and the child says, like, is shaking and trembling and crying. It's really a kind of a sad book. And by the end of the book, the child says he's watching fireworks and says, oh, yes, I feel like fireworks, so they, them are my pronouns. And the last words are literally for today. This is like the end of the day the child spent their whole time. And then it says your pronouns can change like the weather. Books about choosing, kids being free to choose which bathrooms there are. I mentioned the book about having a playground romance in the 4th grade, books about gender transitioning. And the teachers were given materials that said, if students question this or say, how can someone who's born a boy become a girl, then the teachers were instructed to say, that's hurtful when you ask those kinds of questions, instead of engaging the true intellectual curiosity there. So it was very empowering to have the justices kind of have read the books and say, like, these aren't just books about inclusion, right? Mm-hmm. These were books that were driving an ideological agenda on sexuality and gender that is rejected by most Americans, an ideology that most people just have a lot of problems with. It almost felt like a little book club on the bench with the justices kind of like debating what the story meant.
What are your pronouns?
I remember Justice Sotomayor was trying to get me to say something about one of the books that it was just about celebrating, answering a girl's questions about a marriage. And it was funny. I thought I almost feel like I'm in English class again, kind of like there's lots of ways you can construe these books, right? But a lot of parents have their own construction, and we can't really say that their view is wrong when they're thinking about how their own kids will receive these books. But I just wonder too, just going back a little bit, I think that morning when we kind of gathered on the courthouse steps was the first time that all of us had been together, both of you and then also the Mahmouds, who are of course the main name on the case, unfortunately couldn't be with us this afternoon. But to me, having all of you show up and just knowing we'd been on this 2-year journey together, and then you're out in front of on this beautiful sunny day on the Supreme Court steps, it was really inspiring to know that just ordinary citizens, people who were not necessarily all that just doing the normal, volunteering at your school, not really being too politically involved, not running for office, just one voice out of millions, and yet here you were with an opportunity to be on the steps of this United States Supreme Court. I thought that was a pretty amazing moment, just being there with you.
Once in a lifetime, for sure.
It
was also interesting. Even Kagan, at one point said to, I think it was the opposing counsel, one does not need a religious reason to be opposed to what's the content of some of these books.
Right.
Actually, which was very interesting. I thought she might almost side with us. Right.
Yeah, we thought she might, and she has her own reasons for not. One of the things that's interesting is sometimes those arguments can become kind of contentious. All of you had the opportunity to be inside the courtroom. What was that like? Kind of, hearing that and seeing the justices in action?
Some of it was a little frustrating on the other side. I'm like, I can answer that, like I got this.
You want to
one.
have a voice, yeah.
Yeah. But gosh, your courage up there and just trying to, hammer down all the points and all of our, just how passionate we are about and the biggest argument the other side has is that we're trying to ban books, and that was so frustrating. This is about my child. You can keep the books in your library. We just want the opportunity to opt my own child out. This doesn't concern you and your children. So that was just so frustrating for us. Just all the, you're not, just all the bad things that have been, said about us. And if you know us as people, we would never want to exclude anybody. So it was neat to see.
Yeah, and we had deliberately made the choice in the litigation, right, not to try to get the books out of the libraries or out of the curriculum. There is a point at which, you kind of live by the democratic process, right? The majority vote people in, and those people have those books in. You may question next whether you want to reelect them, but we weren't asking for that. We simply came in and said, look, parents should be able to have the choice just to have their kids step out. That was I thought was a good balance that gave the court a way to kind of focus in on the parental rights without, a lot of courts kind of don't want to be involved in second guessing elections and what the majority wants and so forth. But they really could hone in this way on the parental rights. And so that was an important part of this litigation too.
I think it's so important, and we don't talk about this enough, but I think it's so important to kind of bridge this gap between the people that are saying that, again, we're all for inclusivity, everybody has to be included. Our religious beliefs do that already. Mm-hmm. We include everybody and accept everybody for who they are and how they, act out their personalities and things like that. We teach that to our children. The only difference is we don't go into the detail and describing all sorts of different types of people's behaviors. So kindness is universal. We don't need to go in and under this disguise of teaching our children kindness, introduce Pride Puppy. We just don't, because a message we have to deliver to our children is that you do have to be kind to everybody, and you have all types of people in different ranges, different physical abilities, different languages they speak. Mm-hmm. All of that is taught from the religious perspective as accepting, as respectful. And so for the opposing side to come back at us and say, you're bigots, etc., and we are all about inclusion, and yet to me, the first question I asked my principal is, well, I don't feel very included. Mm-hmm. You are standing here in front of me saying we would like to represent all families. How about my family? Yeah. How do you make sure you represent my family in this school system?
We teach our child, and we believe that we must treat everyone with respect because we're all made by God. We're all God's children. What certain agendas are saying is that, no, you're not made, God made mistakes. We don't believe that. That you can make yourself in your own image is what this agenda is really trying to teach these children. That goes at the heart, the fundamental heart of my Catholic faith, that I am made in the image of God. And that as I am made as a man for a purpose, my wife is made as a woman for a purpose. I could not be who I am as any of the other 35 genders that now exist. I could only be who I am as a man.
I think it's surreal too, Eric, on the question on being, beyond the fact that, I've termed that Vindication Day with those comments that came out, and that's really what was happening day in and day out. To hear Justice Kavanaugh make the point, it's kind of crazy that, and I'm going to misquote him, but just found it fascinating that he's here based on a state founded under religious liberty and freedom, and that Montgomery County, who sits there and talks about it, and yet we're sitting there arguing for our religious rights. I thought that was awesome. And the second thing, and we were open with our girls throughout this, the historical significance going forward, but go back to the founding of the country. The forefathers, the folks who built the country, nearly 250 years ago, to have the foresight to know that ordinary citizens need a way to push back to protect their constitutional rights. And to see that live action, that was really cool from an American history perspective.
Yeah, and it is this difficult question where you have people on two sides of a controversial issue who feel very strongly and deeply, how do you kind of allow people to live side by side. And the opt-outs are one way to do that, where it's okay, we let the majority kind of speak, and then we let those who disagree, if it offends their religious beliefs, to opt out. And then we can have this kind of plurality where we continue to live side by side without constantly focusing on the controversy. And, the ballot box will change from time to time, and other people will need opt-outs another time. So I think it was a really great, way to approach this issue. One of the things I was just going to share being in the Supreme Court, this was my first oral argument in the Supreme Court. I've been in the audience many times and watched, but it's quite a different experience to stand there at the podium and have 9 different, people, very intelligent people throwing questions at you. Now, that I had gone through like 7 or 8 practice oral arguments where we brought in religious liberty scholars, we brought in former law clerks of the Supreme Court justices, we brought in other religious liberty experts, and kind of just really got woodshedded, a number of times to really kind of hone these arguments, which was great because by the time I got in there, I felt very prepared and able to answer their questions. I gave myself kind of 5 minutes just to geek out, just to enjoy the wow, what an incredible place to be. It's such a beautiful courtroom and a beautiful building. I wanted to just share a little too about the experience because obviously justices often have their own strong views, and so sometimes they are really kind of pressing you in an aggressive way, as you saw. My daughter, who is 11, she was outside listening to it, and I remember when I got out, she said, 2 of the justices had kind of really gone hard after me. And she said, I will never forgive them for the way they treated me. And I said,
rough start, yeah.
I said, well, that's not our religious belief. Let's forgive. And then I had an opportunity to kind of talk to her about how the legal process worked, that this kind of aggressive question is actually what allows us to kind of get to the real nub of the issue and understand what's really at stake. And so I don't take offense or criticize those justices for kind of like going at me, tongue and hammer, because that's really part of the process of kind of really drilling down to what the truth is. And I have just great respect for each of the justices and for kind of the perspective they bring. And, I disagree with some of them, of course, on certain cases. But overall, I really loved seeing the process in action. This is a process where you have, you really get to argue what matters. Their questions were really focused on the core principles that were at stake. And even if there was disagreement about what the outcome should be, it was fun to see, to kind of put aside all of the froth and the other issues that come around it, and to really focus in on the core issues. And so that was a neat experience, and it's, I think, encouraging to see our system work. That the Supreme Court, has this amazing role, and ultimately, we got the decision we wanted. Right? We had 6 of the justices rule in our favor. A really strong opinion focused on parental rights, elevating the right of parents. The justices said the rights of the parents do not end at the schoolhouse door, but follow the child into the schoolhouse. There's going to be a lot of litigation in the future to kind of understand exactly what that means. But one of the exciting things is we're already seeing schools kind of put out, policies where they're going to list the books, they're going to describe the books, they're going to give parents the right to opt out. As you know, we're still kind of in discussions with Montgomery County about exactly how that's going to look. Seems simple, the Supreme Court says do this, but on the ground, there's some real kind of back and forth to try to figure out exactly how to do that. So the case is still ongoing in a sense. After 2.5 years, what we got was a ruling that you're protected while the litigation plays out. So technically we could still go through another couple of years of litigation, but hopefully we're working to see if we can resolve at this point with the county to get to a solution that will work for the family. So. Other thoughts, that you had about the experience.
And a solution that recognizes that we won.
Yeah.
I think they haven't quite grasped that yet.
I think that's fair.
Please remind them.
Yeah, we're working on that. So, but yeah, we definitely won. We definitely have the Supreme Court opinion behind us, and so kind of wrapping up the details is still a little bit of work, but.
I wanted to just kind of make one more point, which I think, when we were talking about seeing the system work, I think what we have lacked seeing the educational system work, especially in Montgomery County, because while we're distracted with these conversations and the topic of inclusion, the actual education of our children, the things that parents trust for the school system to do, which is teach them math, English, like reading, spelling, is failing. We are failing our children on a daily basis. And so it is discouraging to see that the county would prioritize and take up the time arguing with the parents about, elective topics and subjects when the primary responsibility of the system, in this case, this public school system, they are absolutely failing. They are taking on a task of teaching our children moral values when they cannot perform to par their primary goal and their primary task of educating them in the basic reading, writing.
That's a great point. I mean, the fact that we're still, to your point earlier, 2.5 years, almost 3 years still in this, they would have spent $10 more million if they thought they could have won. And their priorities are so misaligned from what their actual mission is, which, to Lana's point, the parents need to look into the Montgomery County test scores. They're really, really bad. It's not the school system Melissa and I went to, which was what, first, second, or third in the country back then, not to date ourselves, but it's not that anymore.
That's one of the things coming from Pennsylvania. Like the first 10 years I was here, we got married, we're starting to talk about kids. Everyone's like, oh, you're an MCPS. That it is an elite public school system. They'll self-admit right now that it has degraded over the past 15 years. If they're being honest, there's admissions directors at colleges throughout the country, locally and national, throughout the country, that are pretty much calling our grades bogus because the questions are being asked by new leadership about, well, why aren't you accepting kids from MCPS at the same rate you did?
That's from the superintendent's mouth.
Correct. The response is because your grades are bogus. Your kids are not prepared. So Lana's exactly right. We're talking about this. We're sending kids to college that can't even add. And that's a really sad statement that it could be degraded that quickly to a point where we're talking about this.
In some ways, you're focusing so much on inclusivity, and you're really kind of excluding kids by not giving them the education that will put them on equal grounds with everybody.
You're not preparing them.
Focusing on the subject matter in a lot of ways just gives everyone an equal opportunity. But, you guys did an amazing job. I'm really thankful to you for being on the podcast, of course, but also more for being willing to pursue this lawsuit because, there's lots of issues to fight. There's lots of issues. Different people have different concerns, but one of the big things is establishing that parents should be in the ultimate control of their children's religious upbringing. And I think reinforcing that, getting the Supreme Court to issue such a great decision really gives, others who want to pursue some of these other issues to move forward. I know that you all and a lot of the parents who got involved in this are now a lot more engaged in Montgomery County politics because you've kind of seen now, I can make a difference. You've also seen more of the problems, and you're really working hard to kind of continue to make an improvement for all of the citizens of our community. So I think that's a great way to wrap up our conversation. Thank you for joining in. Thank you for everyone who's listening. If you'd like to learn more, you can go to becketfund.org and read more about this case and other cases. We hope that you'll like this podcast, listen to our other episodes, and share with a friend. And until then, thanks for listening to Stream of Conscience.